Alright, do you think an arts career is viable as a normal career in Singapore?
Not really.
Do you think that it's viable to have an arts career in Singapore?
I don't think so. Not at all.
So like speaking from like a dancer point of view, like I feel that it's not exactly viable because
Compared to like more standard stuff like STEM and banking, I think the arts is less viable.
I don't think.
but-
I mean, to me, art is a good thing, but then if as a full-time job, it's only if like you're able to commit. If you,
I personally think that it's not as important. I'm sorry.
So the answer is true. An overwhelming yes. But why?
Simply because of financial instability.
Society nowadays are more towards, more towards the like office jobs.
It's meant for dreamers, it's not very practical.
There is no evidence showing that artists in Singapore make any less or more than any other career path. It's hard to quantify the average artist salary. And the argument that arts in Singapore isn't great because our country is so young, or that the government doesn't support artists enough, can be said about many other professions. The point is, Singaporeans have a negative view of the arts, but more than that, that view is largely baseless or unresearched. And that, if anything, is a definition of stigma. In the next 20 minutes, we will show you how there's a strong stigma against the arts in Singapore, and why.
If the education system evolves, because I think clearly that's what is hampering people from thinking outside the box and in a creative manner.
Factor number 1. Education. Though Singapore has some of the best performing students in the entire world, ranking first on the PISA test for example, it comes at a cost. Singapore's education is far from holistic. People say that our education focuses too much on academics and too little on the arts. One example is how arts is almost always just a co-curricular activity and never a main subject.
The education system in Singapore is still very much focused on math and science, but that's the way that the economy is going. There is arts education in Singapore, and there are options for an arts education with like School of the Arts and things like that. Or other areas like sports, where you have the sports school, but those are still specialized niche areas.
In fact, budgets for schools' arts programs have been cut by 10% in the past year. What does that say about whether our education system believes art is important? Many students feel they don't get enough opportunity to explore art.
I was from art when I was in secondary school, but I wasn't given the opportunity to take art.
I do interested in art. It's just that I don't have the chance to pursue it. Yeah.
Inevitably, these unbalanced values trickle down to the students themselves. In 1992, 16,970 students took literature as a subject in secondary school, an art subject. As of 2014, only 5,500 students sat down for a literature test for O levels, with only 3,100 taking it in full, while the rest only as an elective subject.
I'm not too interested in the arts.
No, I'm not a very artsy type of person.
From the news, from the websites, and I think media of various platforms would say that less students are taking literature, moving away from the arts, and arts practitioners are lamenting over it. I feel that it's a pity.
Another example of students veering from the arts lies in SOTA. The SOTA curriculum is a 6-year IB course with arts integrated on top of it. Students leave with an IB certificate, the same as any other student from an IB school. Is it any wonder then that the majority of SOTA students go on to pursue non-arts related courses? This doesn't occur only in SOTA, but in other schools as well.
I was an art student, but I wanted to take arts in fashion major, but I didn't want to because of the mindset that, if I take art in Singapore, I'm not sure whether I can actually go far, and I don't know whether I can actually pursue a career in it.
One might think this is a common occurrence all over the world. Many artists struggle for a long time and get backup degrees in case the arts doesn't work out. This happens all over the world because arts is such a competitive industry. But in Singapore,
it's clearly challenging. It's one of the most challenging. I'm French. I was just back in Paris last week. There's so much more opportunity, of course, in France for people in the art, but it's just starting here. So you have everything is to be created and made from scratch. So it's pretty good. A lot of opportunities, a lot of challenge.
This isn't because arts is too competitive. It seems to simply be that many artists just don't want an arts career.
After my education, probably have to find like an actual job. Maybe it won't be arts related, like I don't have high hopes for that. I don't know, a job at Starbucks or...
As is a typical Singaporean way, education affects the parents just as much as the students. Perhaps it's the way our education frames the arts as just a side hobby. This has made many parents prevent their child from taking arts. So our country's education has left something to be desired, breeding the mindset in students that arts isn't a valid career choice.
I personally think that it's not as important. I'm sorry. Like, I think that doctors save lives, and they actually do important stuff like contribute and yeah.
And it reinforces the parents' beliefs that their children shouldn't pursue arts either.
Because Asian parents, right, they don't support. They always go for like the old system where you have to get like a stable job, right? Nothing to do with design. Yeah, just because of the pay.
I have had people tell me that you did so well for your O-levels, why did you choose arts? Or you're wasting your good grades, or your brain is being maligned by the whole stigma of, arts is the best, arts is freedom and all. So I've been told a lot by my own secondary school teachers who told me that I shouldn't go to art school and instead do something that is less creative and more aligned to mathematics or science or something like that.
Who knows how many young artists never reach their potential because they were never given the opportunity. But why is Singapore's education so lopsided?
The country is relatively young when you compare it to other countries in the world. And in order to get to where we were so quickly, or where we are so quickly, there had to be obviously a lot of emphasis on moving forward, progress and things like that. And math and science are very easy ways to move forward because those feed into sectors like engineering and things like that. So where we are now is an offshoot of that mindset. The general consensus is that you concentrate on the practical things, which then afford you luxuries. And in our context, luxuries meaning the arts basically, right? Theatre, film, fine arts, anything like that. Because those things don't have a tangible value, dollar value.
Singapore is still in an educational hangover, and we simply haven't moved on, nor adjusted our curriculum. Another reason could be that our government is moving towards a smart nation, with an emphasis on technological and IT sectors.
And Singapore must always stay with the leaders to attract talent and business, to live up to our own expectations of what we ought to be and can be. To do such smart nation projects, big or small, we need engineers, programmers, data analysts, technicians.
So our education naturally will gear towards producing better IT workers. Don't forget that along with SOTA came two other new specialized secondary institutions, the School of Science and Technology and the NUS High School of Math and Science. There is no doubt that our education system, be it for the future of this country or not, cultivates or at least reinforces a stigma against the arts in Singapore.
The government's view on the arts industry in Singapore is pretty pathetic.
Factor 2. Government. Above education is how the government itself treats the arts apart from how they tailor our education curriculum. So how does the government treat the arts? Well, at a glance. We have a busking program that is saturated with applicants, a variety of places for arts to be displayed, performed, and made. In fact, here's a list of all the arts galleries and museums in Singapore. We have a sizable amount of funding for arts-related events in Singapore. In fact, $150 million was spent in 2017 on heritage and the arts, up from previous years. So that's good, right?
Once you do enough corporate videos, you realize that the Singapore government board in general, if you're doing work for the government, right, they like to portray this very clean image of their employees, the work that they do. So I found that a lot of times when we try to do like a realistic representation of, let's say, the job of a cleaner, which is like quite hard and then tough and tiring, right? A lot of times you will face resistance from clients because they will try to paint a happier picture. I say like, actually the uncle enjoys what he's doing, you know, like it's all fun, like cleaning and stuff. But actually, in reality, you know that it's a sweaty, like thankless job. So that's something I found a lot in getting our content past like clients or censors. You realize that even towards the end, they still have like another level of censorship that tries to make it more like beautiful, like happy-go-lucky kind of thing. Yeah, it's a bit annoying because sometimes your vision is a bit different from what they actually want, and so along the way, your vision gets disrupted. At the end of the day, I don't know whether your product actually looks like your product anymore.
Governmental support is a double-edged sword. Though the government does provide funding or venues, it also exerts a large amount of control on artists. For example, take Sunny Liu, the author of the book The Art of Charlie Chan Hock Chai. At first, he had a grant from the government, which was then withdrawn, as the satirical novel, quote, undermined the legitimacy of the government. And that's the problem. When the government funds the arts, it has leverage. They can say, we will attach rules to this grant. Take it or leave it. Which is why arts in Singapore looks like this.
There's a time to take control. There's a time to give an answer. It's poison to your soul.
And not like this.
The head of department, who was also a PAP MP, sued me for defamation. And as a result, I ended up having to pay something in the region of about $300,000 US.
This is Singapore Rebel, a documentary directed by Martin See. It follows the life of opposition leader Dr. Chee Soon Juan and was banned in Singapore for 4 years before the government reclassified it as M18 in 2009.
I made a political film about Dr. Chee Soon Juan, who is one of the opposition leaders. And for that, the police called me up and had my cameras confiscated. I was placed under investigation for 1.5 years. But my reaction is very untypical of Singaporean. My reaction was basically to fight back. And I fought back by making more documentaries. And those were also banned, but those didn't get a police call up, like the one that I did.
On the other hand, what does someone who became successful through producing this censored content have to say?
And in Singapore, I suppose, you know, there's always been some kind of a mindset that being involved in the arts and trying to make a living out of doing art is silly, and it probably is, but that's all I know, that's all I've ever known, and I'm just lucky to continue to be able to do this.
Calvin Heng, former nominated MP, said that the taxpayers' money shouldn't be spent on something as subjective as the arts, and instead that it should be privately funded. What does this say about the Singaporean arts scene if it cannot survive without the government, that it cannot stand on its own 2 legs?
I'm Lawrence Silo, I'm a film director from Norway, and this is my wife.
Cecilia Silo.
So we live in Oslo in Norway. It's really good.
Yeah, it's really good.
Several great art museums, galleries.
I'm French. I was just back in Paris last week, There's so much more opportunity, of course, in France for people in the art.
Ultimately, however, the government support for the arts is just surface level. Though it receives funding, it is also heavily suffocated by censorship. In 2004, MDA introduced new guidelines and performance ratings, meaning the G, PG, and R18.
When I was a kid, you saw stuff on TV. It was heavily censored, and with no concern for aesthetics, right? You watch a film and they'd have literally scenes cut out and the story wouldn't make sense. But just so that you couldn't see that 2 seconds of a dead body, or like, you know. I remember watching the film Alien on TV when I was a kid, and there was a scene where a robot was torn in half by the alien, and this is a robot, this is not a human being. And that scene was cut out, and I had no idea that that scene was in there, and the story didn't really make sense. So only years later when I saw the film uncut that I realized that that scene was there.
With it, artists are to be trained as content assessors, self-rating their own performances. This creates a dilemma. Do artists rate their shows strictly, keep the MDA happy, or do they rate their shows liberally and risk a $5,000 fine? Artists don't know and cannot reconcile this co-regulation. And this is just one of many examples of how censorship, badly implemented, chokes the arts industry in Singapore. The stigma for the arts can largely be attributed to its subjectivity. There are no good grades, no guaranteed high-paying stable jobs, and no clear road on how to become successful. But there are no bad grades either, no lesser chance of a fulfilling job. The arts is fluid, and it simply does not gel with Singaporean values.
If you look at Singapore's history, we've always prided ourselves on being practical and on being idealistic. That's why we're not the US, that's why we're not China, because we don't have a common line that we follow. We need to be practical if the country is going to survive.
是经济上它一定要独立，完全独立才可以搞这个东西啊，我是觉得。不然是会很痛苦的，家人也要陪着他一起付出很多。
Yeah, I say it's just a Singaporean because when I tell like my foreign friends that I'm in fashion, they're like more accepting towards when I tell my secondary school friends that I'm doing fashion in an art school.
When I was trying to pursue the film thing, like my parents, which is the older generation, would say that it's not a stable job, it's not a proper like work kind of thing, right? So in general, like I said earlier, I think Singaporeans think that arts is just a hobby, it's not a proper job, although that is changing slowly. Yeah, so that is the stigma that I feel still exists even today.
The people that are older than me, for a large part of their lives, have been told what to do. Now that you can't just turn around and say, okay, now think for yourself, because they're going to be lost.
But in the end, is stigma against the arts bad? Does it even need to be fixed? Well, not exactly.
I think they are as important, but we definitely need less artists than, let's say, engineers. Because, I mean, that's what Singapore's economy relies on, right? And honestly speaking, how many artists or filmmakers do you actually want Singapore to have?
Singapore can thrive on the arts like it can on being business friendly. Maybe a stigma is necessary, so that the small few that get dissuaded from pursuing the arts pursue something more necessary. And that's okay. We need to move away from calling it a stigma and instead accept that there are harsh realities of being an artist in Singapore.
There's some people who have some misconceptions, I suppose, about the arts. Not so much a stigma anymore. I mean, you know, you're no longer the kind of the outcasts of society. That's what I try to convince myself anyway.
The government needs to break down the barriers surrounding art and let Singaporeans figure it out for themselves.
My film was banned in 2005, 2006. By 2009, I resubmitted it and it was allowed.
It definitely needs to change because they don't really pay much attention to the fact that the arts is also a big booming industry. They like to give opportunities to certain people, but they don't like to curate the whole system.
But not everything is bad.
In Brunei, they don't have poly, so we don't really get to choose what we want to do. Yeah, so it's much limited in Brunei because we have to follow like a system, you know, learning all the general subjects like science.
I mean, the city is very, I guess colorful compared to Brunei. Brunei is so dead. Like there's, you know, the laws there are strict. There's no like I don't know. When it comes to arts, they're very like restrictive because of like the Muslims and yeah, the Islam rules, things like that. So Singapore's quite open with that.
Just because of the difference in culture, I guess very easily just assume that yes, there is a difference in what I do there and what I do here. But to be honest, I don't think there really is much of a difference. It's just no matter where you're doing this, it's just hard. It's going to be hard.
Singapore isn't the strictest country, nor the country with the strongest stigma against the arts. Not every Singaporean thinks badly of the arts.
I think a lot of people think that Singapore's not viable and we're too small, but I think it's definitely possible. Yeah.
As bleak as some people may think the situation is about the arts in Singapore, it has never been better. I honestly believe that, and I think it can only get better from here.
With the current situation, Singapore is never going to have our own Steven Spielberg, Lang Lang, or Bruno Mars. But who knows? Maybe in the decades to come, we will.